Imagine you're living in a world that's entirely flat, like characters drawn on a piece of paper. This, by the way, is the world of Flatland, as conceptualized by Carl Sagan. Now consider the residents here. We'll call them the 2D prisoners. They live their lives without any awareness of a third dimension. They can move left, right, forward and backward, but the idea of up or down is beyond their comprehension. What if one day, something from our three-dimensional world pokes through Flatland? Let's say it's a sphere, like a basketball. As it passes through their world, what the Flatlanders see is a circle that first appears as a point, grows to its widest, then shrinks back to a point before vanishing. To them, it's a mysterious event, almost like magic. This simple interaction opens up a fascinating thought. As 3D beings, we can easily enter and leave the 2D world of Flatland. But what about our existence? Are there dimensions beyond our own that we are simply unable to perceive? Could we be limited by our own perceptual boundaries? We're about to journey into realms that challenge our very understanding. Realities filled with mysteries, hidden mechanics, and untapped phenomena. A portion of this video has been inspired by a popular book from Michio Kaku, Hyperspace, a scientific odyssey through parallel universes, time warps, and the 10th dimension. Professor Kaku takes us on a journey beyond the familiar 3 dimensions of space and one of time. So now, to really appreciate where these ideas come from, let's rewind to 19th century Germany. A brilliant scientist at the time, Carl Friedrich Gauss, was way ahead of his time. He imagined a world that wasn't flat, but could actually curve, something he called theorema egregium. By simply examining differential geometry, he figured out how to measure the curvature of surfaces without needing to step back and look at the space around them. Another German mathematician, Bernhard Riemann, introduced a revolutionary concept. He developed the mathematics necessary to describe spaces of various dimensions, which he called an n-dimensional manifold with a metric. This generalization transformed how mathematicians view the nature of space and laid the groundwork for Einstein's relativity in physics. The interesting thing is that Riemann did not do this for Einstein, and his work was completely decades prior. In fact, it was considered abstract mathematics until the need arose to describe the non-Euclidean geometry of space-time in the presence of gravity. But some would argue that even without Riemann geometry, Einstein was brilliant enough to develop the necessary equations independently, and in the end came up with a similar equation just like this, that we all familiar with. Around the same time, Hermann von Helmholtz, who was also a fellow German scientist just like Einstein, made a fascinating discovery. He explored the connection between mathematics of hyperspace and human perception. He suggested that just as beings in a 2-dimensional world would struggle to comprehend 3-dimensional objects, humans might not be equipped to perceive higher dimensions. So what does it mean that lower dimensional beings can't comprehend 3D existence? We'll demonstrate this in the next chapter of this video. Picture a scenario where you can instantly travel from one place to another without any effort. No more long commutes or rushing to class. This thought brings up a fascinating question. What kind of beings have the ability to appear and disappear at will? According to Professor Michio Kaku, the answer lies in higher dimensional worlds. So to illustrate this, let's revisit our dear friends. In their 2D world, you can trap someone simply by drawing a circle around them. They can't escape outside the circle because their world doesn't include the idea of stepping over it. But for us living in 3 dimensions, it's a simple matter to help them. We can just reach down, lift the Flatlander, and place him outside the circle. What seems easy for us would appear as a remarkable power to them. And think about the perspective of a Flatland guard. Seeing a prisoner vanish and reappear elsewhere would be utterly confusing. For the guard, the prison is secure and escape-proof. The idea of moving up of the Flatland plane doesn't make sense in their 2-dimensional world. Similarly, the notion of seeing or interacting with their internal organs would seem impossible. But for beings in higher dimensions, it's trivial to reach inside a Flatlander and perform surgery without cutting the skin.
Medical surgery in a 2-dimensional universe, they'd have to cut you open and then reach in and do what they need to, come out and then stitch you up again. If we live in 3 dimensions, you get to look down on that flat world and see all the inner guts of every living creature in that universe. Because there is no boundary above and below, it's only within the plane itself. You can see the heart beating, you can see the spleen, the liver, the pancreas, the lungs, you can see it all.
From the Flatlander's viewpoint, beings from our three-dimensional world would seem to have godlike powers. The ability to see into and interact with closed spaces, such as houses or underground areas, would be viewed as omnipotent. But for us, these abilities are not magic. They are simply the result of a more advantageous perspective that comes from existing in a higher dimension.
Of course, we go higher, this fifth dimension, sixth dimensions, this sort of thing. Mathematically, you can calculate what all the properties are.
That's right. If we go back to our earlier bit about the 2D prisoner, we can also extend this concept to our three-dimensional reality. You see, as a 3D creature, we fully experience all three spatial dimensions. But again, consider the idea of a four-dimensional space-time continuum. In terms of imprisonment, we are in a sense prisoners of the present. As Dr. Tyson eloquently put it, we are forever transitioning from the past to the future. So what if we are prisoners in this alpha world and want to break free? Well, we can achieve this by transcending into beta, where we are no longer bound by the present. In the intricate physics of our universe, our understanding of space and time has evolved from seeing them as separate entities to recognizing their deep interconnection. This four-dimensional space-time curvature is influenced by the mass and energy of objects, creating what we perceive as gravity. In this framework, time is the fourth dimension, extending beyond the three spatial dimensions we navigate daily. It also suggests that the passage of time is influenced by the gravitational pull of masses. This, in particular, leads to the realization that time can stretch or compress. Such understanding allows us to see time not as a universal constant, but as a dimension that, like space, is shaped by the dynamic structure of our universe. So back to our point. What alpha beings would experience linearly as a sequence of events from the past to the future, they are essentially prisoners of time's flow.
How do we put us in a cell? We have 6 walls, a ceiling, floor, 4 walls around us. We think we are completely contained within it. A higher dimensional creature said, just step out and then step back in and you're outside the cell. We said, I don't know what you're talking about.
Hold on. We're talking about adding another dimension to our world, which is the time component of a 4D space-time curvature. So we should think of this imprisonment as it's not only the spatial 6 walls that hold you, it's the linear progression of time that is always moving forward.
If we had access to the 4th dimension, which for us is what? Time, but wait, we're prisoners of time. So suppose we weren't prisoners of time. Suppose you could move through time the way we move through space. Could you then escape the prison?
So if you master the nonlinear progression of time, then you can step out of the linear flow. This allows you to exit your current moment and re-enter at a different point in time. So your prison escape begins the moment you take that first step through the so-called time door. You're no longer bound by the sequential order of events, and the spatial confines of the jail lose their power over you.
You just go back to a time before you got put in a prison, or go to the future where you were let go from the prison. Each of those counts as escaping the prison without ever breaking down the wall. So time can serve that same role if you had access to the past and to the future.
You might be wondering, this beta higher dimensional being sounds like too good to be true, right? It can always access both the past and the future, meaning that there's no need for a physical prison. Although there is actually a type of prison that will constrain the movement of beta. It's called the time prison. So in this hypothetical concept, prisoners are sentenced to a loop of repeated events for eternity. They would experience the same events, over and over again. It's not physical torture that confines them, but the idea of existing there forever. They can't leap forward in time because the future is just like the present. And so if you don't want to be constrained in this situation, what can you do? Is there a state of freedom you can attain to break free? Well, you can. You just need to reach the gamma level. So let's recap here for a second. In the previous video of this series, we discussed the difference between beta and gamma. The real difference is the idea that with beta, you don't know exactly where to time travel to. You try to probe and see different moments in space-time, but you don't have the bigger picture of your own timeline. It's like navigating a vast ocean with a compass that only tells you your current location. You can pedal forwards or backwards, visit any island and stuff, but there's no map showing all the routes, the storms, or the treasures. Each journey in the beta realm is an exploration. You have to make the guess based on your position without truly understanding the full expanse of the ocean and its myriad possibilities. Just like how Loki felt confused about his time slipping. And so to avoid being constrained in this situation, we need to transcend to the gamma realm. What's going to change is that now you're given a bird's eye view of the entire ocean of possibilities. every possible route you could take from any point you're standing on. So it's not just about moving to different points along your timeline, it's about understanding the entire network of paths your journey could take. Suddenly you see how different choices branch out, creating different alternate realities, each with its unique outcomes and adventures. This realm allows you to not only visit any moment of the journey, but also to understand how each one of them connects, how one decision could diverge into multiple futures. Essentially to perceive the grand tapestry of your possible existences, woven by time.
And we'd be looking for things that would be new variables, new ways of working with the world that allowed us to do things that were previously considered inconceivable.
If you feel that there's nothing that can bind the gamma beings, that's not entirely true. As illuminating as it is, the panoramic view of your timeline in gamma comes with its own limitations. Yes, you can see the plausible different paths. But what about traversing them? By that I mean all of these possible worlds can actually exist as a way of interpreting the mathematics of quantum mechanics, where each one is a state in the global superposition of states. Yet all these realities remain intangible until they are observed. And the very act of observation collapses the superposition, making one of these many possibilities our perceived reality. So, what if this sort of ocean is kind of a prison itself, and that you need to find the one key to unlock yourself from within? Is there a way that you can navigate without exploring all these possible routes and get to the right path immediately? Well, in order to break free from this constraint, we need to explore what the next level offers. Stepping up one more level, we enter the realm of delta, or as we explained in the previous video, it's the superset of possible worlds. In delta, not only can you perceive the various potential outcomes of your ocean of choices, but you can also see all those choices concurrently. And so, the constraints of gamma are overcome by providing a comprehensive view of all possible paths simultaneously. More importantly, you aren't just aware of these different pathways. You can traverse and select from them without needing to observe and collapse the superposition as in gamma. This means you can navigate directly to the optimal reality, bypassing the trial and error of exploring such potential route. And so, you unlock the ability to choose the best possible outcome from potential realities, such that you can escape the constraints that bind you in lower dimensions. So let's denote this superset with this symbol, inspired by Schrödinger's many worlds interpretation. But did you notice that we mentioned potential realities, and not all potential realities? You might be asking, what else is there? Seems like there's nothing that can constrain them, right? Well, you guessed it. All of these hierarchies are bound by the same initial condition. Think about wanting to know how you came to be born. You might look into earlier events, facts about your parents and how they met, facts about your grandparents, or even facts about humans in general. Soon enough, you'd find yourself thinking about how our place in the universe evolved. You can trace the chain of causes and effects back and back and back, arbitrarily far. But in the grandest scheme of things, this branched timeline of delta beings converges at the same origin point, the Big Bang. So, how do we break free from this constraint? What if we wanted to create another pathway with different initial conditions? The answer lies in our previously mentioned epsilon level. This is how we can break free. There could be completely different realities created through initial conditions distinct from our own Big Bang. Different initial conditions will create different universes, and the resulting branching of timelines from that universe's beginnings to all its possible endings will form another subset separate from those associated with our own universe. In Epsilon, you are not just navigating a single tree of possible outcomes, you gain the ability to explore multiple universes, each originating from different starting points. This level offers a multiplicity of beginnings, allowing for a broader understanding of existence beyond the singular initial conditions that constrain the previous lower-level inhabitants. But again, the question becomes, how can we constrain this omniscient power? Is there any way to bind an epsilon being? This time, I really want you to think this through. Back in the gamma level, we know that gamma doesn't have the complete subset of possible worlds. So when we ask gamma beings to locate the specific trajectory to get to that treasure island, it's not so easy for them. They'd have to acquire the superset of their possible worlds. And so if we ask the same type of question, can you constrain these epsilon beings? Well, just ask them what the specific pathway from the many different initial conditions is. That will yield the optimal goal. There you go. An epsilon being could not answer it, unless they have already mapped the whole planes of different initial conditions. And this brings us to the lambda level. Just like our prior explanation, lambda level beings have mapped the entirety of possible different initial conditions. So if you ask them for one specific life path that will maximize your happiness in a given reality, they would already know the answer to this fundamental question, even without having to perceive each timeline one by one. Entities of the Lambda world possess a comprehensive map of existence, encompassing every possible initial condition and its resulting hierarchies. This understanding allows them to pinpoint the exact path that leads to any desired outcome. I mean any outcome that they wished for, no matter what they are. A hypothetical inhabitant of the Lambda world really transcends the state where every choice can be made with perfect clarity. Now we have another addition to our symbol, capital Lambda and an origin point, which should look something like this. So the question now is, how can you constrain this being? I mean, if they encompass everything we know about all these different subsets of starting points, what else is there? Well, let me refresh your memory. We can restrict them using a completely different parameter, differing laws of physics. You see, when this Lambda being is constrained to something like reversed entropy, he ages in reverse, being born old and passing away young. He's not able to traverse the same subset of different initial conditions because he must consider an entirely different subset, and that only exists in another subset of this different box. It's important to note that for lower-level beings, navigating this branching of timelines is not easy. In fact, it's almost impossible under different sets of physical laws. Perhaps even a slight attempt to deviate can significantly alter their existence completely.
What's happening?
We're outside time.
So in the sigma level, the very rules of existence can differ drastically. These beings are not just navigating multiple timelines or initial conditions within a single universe, they are exploring entirely new sets of physical laws. These realities can have different gravitational constants, different interactions of matter and energy, and even different conceptions of time. This level showcases the ability to move through these diverse realities, each with its own distinct laws of physics, and fundamentally transcending the limitations of all previous levels. But this time, let's constrain the residents of this level. Using the same line of thinking, we could ask a hypothetical sigma entity which subset of different physical laws will yield a specific end goal. Essentially, a universe where the laws of physics behave in a certain way, and must have started from a particular initial condition. In the end, we'll see that sigma beings wouldn't be able to answer that question without analyzing each one of those boxes and figuring it out along the way. The only way they could be free from this constraint is to possess the characteristics of the grand finale of all existence, the omega dimension. This level is not bound by any constraints that limit lower dimensional beings in our discussion so far. An omega entity have the ability to perceive the power set of all possible existences, from every possible beginning to every possible end, under every conceivable set of physical laws. At this ultimate level, there are no limitations. An omega entity can understand the intricate details of every reality within infinite realities. He can instantaneously determine the exact set of conditions and physical laws needed to achieve any specific goal, across any reality, transcending all levels of existence and achieving a state of ultimate freedom that encompasses the entirety of all possible realities. And so, this is the final symbol to add to our higher dimensional state vector. Reflecting back, we now have three critical elements to navigate this hyperspace world: the many-world state, the initial condition state, and the physical laws. With these state vectors, we can pinpoint exactly where any higher dimensional being resides in hyperspace, as if we describe an object's specific coordinates in the 3D Cartesian system.
I claim that there are going to be 10 extra coordinates. That's something called a symmetric 2 tensor, or a metric. We can do incredible things that are not possible because we don't know the framework.
Some of the mysterious things we are describing accurately make sense in a higher dimension. And that's an aspect of what these higher dimensional physicists are trying to establish.
Just as our limited alpha brains struggle to perceive higher dimensions, it turns out we find it equally challenging when it comes to comprehending lower dimensional existences. I mean, consider the Flatlander story we discussed at the beginning of this video. It's the reality of a flat 2D creature, along with one temporal dimension of time. But imagine what happens if we have only two spatial axes without time. What would happen to our Flatlanders? In fact, what happens to entities in 1D, and thus 0D? The answer is that the absence of time would freeze everything in place. There would be no progression, no movement, and no change. Everything would be static. In fact, there would be no elapsed time between when a photon is emitted from a source and when it is absorbed by an object in flatland. And this holds true not just for creatures in the flatland world, but also for us in our three-dimensional reality. Throughout our discussion so far, we've always treated time as this fundamental dimension. That all these realities from alpha to omega essentially revolve around the idea that if you have multiple temporal dimensions and with time extending infinitely, you can examine the distinct physical characteristics of a specific reality of interest. Yet this time, what if we wanted to treat higher dimensional objects in terms of spatial dimensions, instead of temporal ones? For instance, what a flatlander perceives when looking at a 3D cube is only the cross-sections within their 2D plane. When the cube rotates rapidly, these shapes seem like random patterns. This idea is a lot like what happens during a solar eclipse. Consider that during an eclipse, even though we exist in a 3D space, our perspective is reduced to a 2D cross-section of the moon's shadow. And this shadow can look different depending on where you are on the planet. Here's what you'd see in California. This one is from Colorado, and this last one from New York. And just like that 2D representation of the moon, if we have a flat square that's 2D and pull it upwards, it becomes a 3D cube. Stretch it into an unseen fourth spatial dimension, and we'll get a 4D tesseract, just like this. Another hypothetical object that could exist in this fourth spatial dimension is something called a Klein bottle. It is an example of a non-orientable surface. The interesting thing is that if traveled upon from one side of the surface, we could get back to the point of origin while flipping the traveler upside down. This abstract concept might be perplexing for humans, but higher dimensional beings find it apparent and simple. Perhaps just like when we 3D beings can grasp the concept of a Mobius strip, which eventually loops back to its starting point. Yet any 2D creature would find it magical that we can go back to where we started in space. And so, in this analogy of the Klein bottle and Mobius strip, what if, in a higher dimensional framework of thinking, the linear time we experience is nothing but a causal loop that can be easily explored in higher dimensions, much like the perception of time at the beta or gamma level? So in that concept, we'll find that time doesn't just move forward in a straight line. It circles back, connecting the past and future in ways that aren't always so simple. If you find it hard to comprehend these abstract concepts, you're not alone. Even current AI systems struggles with our 3D reality. A researcher at Malmö University in Sweden is investigating this challenge. His research revolves around the question, could an AI robot perceive a fourth dimension? Magnus Johnson, the researcher in this context, noted that there's a limit even for normally developed human brains. In an interview, he stated, "We don't have the right representations to imagine 4 dimensions. Everything we think of is limited by these feature building blocks, but such building blocks can theoretically be built in AI and used within AGI. Let's just suppose that, in the future, when we have the technology to implement such computations, we'll be able to simulate the existence of higher levels of consciousness, from our own alpha existence to the realm of omega." My final question would be this. Even if you could achieve the highest level of existence, would you want to experience a reality where everything is predictable and nothing is constrained anymore? I mean, you'd know exactly which life path to adopt based on what you set as your primary goal. And all the different sets of the many world branches, the different origins and laws of physics would follow suit. You would know exactly which one of those boxes to pick from the gigantic array of choices. Do you really want that reality? Perhaps for me, the answer is no. I find comfort in the uncertainty of this reality. Even though we are mere cogs in the grand scheme of the universe, we still make decisions and face the consequences of each action. These actions are driven by free will and desire, yet we cannot escape the eternal influence of our emotions. So let's continue to do what we must, day in and day out, by embracing the unknown and accepting our role within the vastness of existence.